How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another video. Today we're gonna make a whole wheat bread with toasted hazelnuts, currants, and will be coated with oat flakes. It's also made with a pre-ferment, so it packs a bunch of flavor, it's got a nice texture, and I absolutely destroyed half of this loaf in about half an hour with most of this Nutella. I've adapted this recipe from a book by Jeffrey Hamelman, my absolute bread hero. And if you are interested, you can find that book linked down below in my Amazon shop. But let's get on with this beautiful bread and see what we need. For the ingredients, we need some whole wheat flour, strong white bread flour, water, yeast, salt, some kind of syrup. I'm using malt syrup, but honey would also work perfectly, sultanas, currants or raisins, some toasted hazelnuts, and I'm going to use some oat flakes for coating the loaf, but you can also use various seeds for this. Now onto the equipment. We'll need a bowl for mixing our dough in, scales, a dough scraper, temperature probe. A bread basket would come in handy. If you don't have one, use a bowl lined with a tea towel. A razor blade for slashing the dough with is perfect. If you don't have one, use a sharp knife. And for best results, a cast iron skillet with a lid is perfect, because it traps steam inside and prevents the crust from forming too quickly. If you don't have one of these, don't feel left out. Bake your bread on a thick tray. And I'll explain later in the video how to create some steam in the oven. And I might just use this basket. We'll decide later. So let's start by making the pre-ferment. All it is part of the total water, part of the total salt, tiny pinch yeast, and part of the total white flour. All we need to do is mix it all up and leave it to ferment, and I'll leave it overnight. It takes around 10 to 12 hours. So this pre-ferment is called a pâte fermentée, which simply means fermented dough in French, also known as old dough or pinchback. And it's called a pinchback because in a bakery, the baker would make his dough on the day, and after mixing, he would pinch a piece back and keep it for the next day's bake. Then on the following day, that piece would be added to the new batch, and after mixing, another piece would be taken for the following day. And that can go on forever. But in this case, we're just doing a one-off, so we make the pre-ferment, leave it overnight, and use it once. Temperature control in this dough is extremely important, so I'm going to use cold water. And I also refrigerated the pre-ferment for 1 hour before using. Because it makes up a significant part of the total dough, if we had left it at room temperature, the final dough after mixing would be too warm. Especially because we're doing an autolyse. Autolyzation is the hydration of flour, which helps with gluten development. It will make the dough easier to handle and cut down on mixing time. And if you want to learn more about autolyzation in detail, click the link in top right corner. Here's the gist of it. I've added most of the water, only kept back a couple tablespoons, which I'm going to use for hydrating the yeast later. And then I mixed in the pre-ferment and all of the remaining flour. All we need to do is make sure to mix it until there's no more dry flour left. Now we're going to cover it up and leave it to hydrate for around 30 minutes. It doesn't take long at all. And if we check the dough now, as you can see, it's nice and stretchy. Now we can continue on. Grab the yeast, add it to the water, then sprinkle the salt over the dough and add the syrup. You can use any sweet syrup that you like. I happen to have some malt syrup at home. It gives a really nice flavor. And once you finish with that, give the yeast a quick mix. Make sure it's nice and dissolved. Then pour it in with the rest of the ingredients. Now comes the slightly messy part, but don't worry about it. It's good to get your hands dirty. Using your hand, just squeeze everything together. You want to try and mix it up until there's no more liquid slashing around in the bowl. Now tip it out on the table and we can start kneading it. And because this dough is quite stretchy and sticky, we're going to use the stretch and fold method. And this is how you do stretch and fold. You pick the dough up by one side, stretch it against the table towards yourself and fold it over forwards. And you always want to pick it up by the side and turn it 90 degrees. Keep doing this and it will start coming together. From a sticky mess, it will become nice and stretchy. And if it's sticking to the table and to your hands, just scrape it all up once in a while. You want to keep kneading this dough for around 8 minutes in total. And there's no need to rush. And you'll see the longer you keep going on, the more stretchy and less sticky it'll become. So after around 8 minutes, we can add the nuts and the currants. The dough is still a little bit sticky, so wet your hands when handling it. Wetting your hands with water is the best way to prevent any stickage. Is that a real word? Stickage? Anyhow, spread the dough out on the table. You want it to be nice and big. Now sprinkle your nuts on it. and follow that with the currants. Now spread them out nice and evenly and press them in with the palms of your hands. Adding the nuts and sultanas now is far better than adding them in the beginning, because adding stuff like this actually cuts the gluten up, so it's always best to add it later on in the process. So now we want to seal up the dough and just knead it for a little bit longer, but now using the regular kneading method by pressing it against the table. And it will take no more than 30 seconds or so. And let's say we're ready for the bulk fermentation. Again, I wet my hands with water finally the dough because it's a bit sticky. Now I can pop it in the bowl and take its temperature. Actually, before we put it in the bowl, give it a nice tight shape. Fold the sides under and into the middle. This will give our dough some more strength. My kitchen's a bit warm today, so around 23 degrees Celsius is just about right for this dough. I'm going to cover it up and leave it for 1 hour for the first proof. If your kitchen's cooler, perhaps you want to make your dough a little bit warmer. You can achieve that by adjusting the temperature of the water or kneading it for longer. But regardless, after the first proof, we need to give it a fold. And this dough is a little bit sticky, so dust it with flour, tip it out on the table, smooth side down. Of course, don't use too much flour, it's easier to add than to take off. Now simply flatten the dough out, then fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until you reach point where you started. Then flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, and that's the fold done. Folding will give the dough more strength, and will prevent it from spreading out as it's baking. After the fold, pop the dough back in the bowl, cover it up, and leave it to ferment for 1 more hour. And now it should really start puffing up, and this looks just about right for me. I'm going to dust it with flour once again, tip it out on the table, smooth side down, and now we can do the final shaping. Of course, if your dough is a bit slow to rise, just leave it for longer. But here's the final shape. Spread the dough out, then fold the two sides over each other in the middle, and then starting from the top, roll it up, and as you roll it, tuck it forwards. And you should end up with a nice tight loaf. And here's how we're going to make the toppings stick to the dough. You want to grab a small tray or a plate to avoid making a mess on your table. And I'm using the oat flakes, but you can use various seeds as well for this. Now to make them stick, I wet my hand with some water and brush the loaf all over. And of course it doesn't have to be dripping wet. So once you finish brushing your loaf with water, pick it up nice and gently and lay it down in the toppings. And then just roll it around, but be nice and gentle because it's still a bit soft. And once you cover the whole surface, place it down in your proofing basket, smooth side down of course. And not to waste any oat flakes, I'm just going to sprinkle them on the bottom of the dough. And there you have it, that's how you coat a loaf. And the best part of using a basket is that the weight of the dough is going to press against it and the oats going to fuse with the surface. And now we're ready for the final proof, and at this point you want to preheat your oven, 220 degrees Celsius, fan off, and also preheat your baking vessel. Now let's cover this bad boy up and leave it to rise. It will take around 40 to 60 minutes depending on the temperature of your kitchen. But once it's nicely puffed up, it's ready for the oven. If yours is taking longer, leave it for longer. Bake the bread when the bread is ready, not when you're ready. Now we can get it in the pan, slash it and bake it. And be careful when doing this because it gets extremely hot. Now invert the dough onto the preheated pan. And then grab your razor blade or sharp knife and cut it from end to end. You want the cut to be around 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch deep. And you want to cut it at an angle. Once you finish with that, pop the lid on and stick the bread in the oven. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this kind of pot is perfect for bread baking, as you want steam in the oven for the first part of the bake. The steam will prevent the crust from drying out and setting too quickly. So we'll bake it with the lid on for 20 minutes, then we'll take the lid off and pop it back in the oven. This is always the best part, because you don't know what's going to be underneath. I'll stick it back in for 15 to 20 minutes. And there you have it. A delicious whole wheat bread made with a pre-ferment, toasted hazelnuts and currants. It looks great, it smells nice, has a beautiful texture and flavor. If you don't have a cast iron pan with a lid, there are other things you can do. Use the thickest, heaviest tray to bake on, and also place a separate metal tray in the bottom of your oven. And as soon as your loaf goes in the oven, pull the bottom tray out and splash half a cup of boiling water in it, but do be careful. This should create a cloud of steam and help the dough expand as it's baking. But if you want to get yourself a pot with a lid, you can find one in my Amazon shop in the link in the description below, along with all the other things I use in my videos. Now here's something random, but I thought some of you might find this interesting. If you have a sourdough starter, you know the pain of washing your jar all the time. But have a look at this Nutella jar. Isn't this perfect for a sourdough starter? It has a plastic lid, which is not gonna rust. It doesn't screw on, so there's no threads to be cleaned. The bottom of the jar is round, and the sides are completely straight, there's no lip. Now compare this to one of the jam jars I was using. It's got all kinds of nooks and crannies that get dirty. So here's my random pro tip. You want a nice sourdough starter jar? Get yourself some Nutella. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.